on topic 23 of 29. Uh, Public information officers. I like the cool stuff there, like the right stuff. Well, I didn't have a chance to look over this one again, but we'll go from my memory, of course. Providing the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make the right decisions. So that's the right stuff. The idea of a public information officer, that is the one person that is, I'm knocking stuff over here and there's a cat helping me do it. So that is the person that is the only one who should talk to the press or the public, because that one person is responsible for knowing everything that's going on and putting it into a legitimate form that you don't tell the wrong things to the wrong people. And that's what I mean by the right information to the right people at the right time. And I, having been in broadcasting a long time, I have seen that happen. And the first thing we do when we're out on a news crew, or when I used to do that, was find the public information officer. Everybody's got them. Fire companies, the state police, and us, and anybody else. They always have one person designated for it. Their idea is media relations. They're, in our case, they're part of the ICS team, and silence is as bad as errors. So, and you don't want anything to have rumors start. So you don't want to give the wrong impressions as you go. Incident command system standardized ways to be a unified voice. And a united command, a UC, all agencies and all public information officers report to the Joint Information Center, the JIC. This will become clear as we go along. The ARES public information officer is an expert in amateur radio, expert in and is with the Joint Information Center and introduces other ARES members to the media. And you don't think you'd be in a position where you would be dealing with ABC News, but believe me, it can happen. Public information and operators, PIO and operators, have to be properly dressed. Avoid interviews with inappropriately dressed members. In our case, what we usually wear are the, I don't know what color they are, but those vests that you wear. And I got mine from the ARRL, and I also got some at Walmart. So they're available everywhere, except that the ones that the ARRL sells actually identify us as ham radio operators. So you should be wearing something like that. And the joke has always been, if you want to see some of the craziest dressed people, go to a ham fest, because it's pretty much true. And we like to put on a better image probably than you would to go into a ham fest. So when you're out on a job like this, try to dress a little bit, look nice, be comfortable. Under no circumstances should you ever speculate as to the outcome of the situation. Provide any information as to the name of victims, the condition of individuals, or the gravity of the situation. All of that is extremely important, because once you start speculating, they'll take it and run with it and call it legitimate. You know, if I were to say, oh, Antifa came in and trashed the place, they'll run with that. And when you're talking, this is extremely important, and I know this from being in the biz. When they say, okay, off the record, don't do it. It all gets recorded. Can the emergency coordinator be the PIO? Well, not really, because his role is something different. Each role has a full-time job and has specifically designated training. So I would say no. Why can't we just anyone talk to the press? And I kind of covered that. Everybody wants 15 minutes of fame and does not have accurate information. Then you start guessing, and then you sound kind of funny on the air. But to them, they think you're the one in charge and you're giving the right answers, so you don't guess. Amateur radio must not be used to assist the news media when normal means are available. That means you don't use your radio to get a hold of another guy and let the media talk to them over ham radio. That violates quite a few rules. Operators may assist from areas where normal communications are disrupted, and the media may record the conversation if your public information officer is somewhere else. But that's some of the rules that you have to follow. Amateur radio operators cannot record and retransmit commercial radio and TV broadcasts over the ham radio. And a lot of times you'll hear people, and this is just a general ham radio thing. You can't do it. And oftentimes you'll hear somebody say, "Hey, listen to this song," an HF or wherever on 2 meters, or they'll say, "Hey, they're talking about whatever on the radio. Let you listen to it." And they hold their microphone over to the radio or the TV. Don't ever do that, because you can't do that. Commercial radio and TV reporters can record and then broadcast. That's their job. And they can record and broadcast amateur messages. We can't rebroadcast them. And that's the end of this one. Any comments before we little quiz thing? No. Okay, a joint information center is established to one of these. I don't know what's happening. It says my internet is unstable. Am I breaking up?
A little bit.
Okay. All these things are what the public, or that the Joint Information Center does. Formulate a unified voice and message, dispel rumors, and provide a central location for all media questions. Let me see where my hotspot is. Well, it's as close to the window as I can get it. An ARES public information officer will be expected to. No, we're not getting coffee for anybody. We're providing relevant information to the media regarding amateur radio involvement. That's our job as a public information officer. You're involved in an ARES deployment, and there's no public information officer. Reporter shows up at your location and starts to ask you questions. What do you do? If possible, refer them to the JIC, designated lead public information officer or ARES public information officer. Don't do it yourself unless you're trained how to deal with these people. There's a flood in progress. A reporter from a local TV station comes to your location and asks you to get on the radio and talk at the levees to find out if they think the sandbags are going to hold. What things need to be considered in that request? Well, there's a lot here. Everything. Are other means of communication available? Amateurs can ask questions if other amateurs, not just someone. The question is speculating about things not specific to amateur radio operation. And how are we going to know if the sandbags are going to hold? That's not our job. We're not Army Corps of Engineers, so we wouldn't know that. Now, any comments on any of that? Okay, let me find the next slide. Click that. Screen sharing stopped. Now we go on to the next. Where was I? I was 23. Okay, are you all seeing that one? No?
No.
Share screen. Now you are.
Yep.
On the public information. Okay, here we go. One of the best public information officers we had in the area at one time, his name was Brian Freeman. He had the Trafax Center for traffic reporting, but being in the broadcast industry, he was excellent. He was a news guy and retired in a news station down in Florida. Alternative communication methods. Amateur radio may not always be the best choice for getting the job done. Um, and it won't always be the only choice too. There are dire situations in which individuals are forced to summon up help by any means available. Occasionally, we find that the tasks within the disaster exceed the limits of the manpower provided by the amateur community. And that's understandable because how many people are trained as amateurs and going through what we're going? And sometimes it's better to hand off an official radio. It's better to hand an official radio he can use to stay in contact with the ARES team on site and not saddle him or her with a ham radio shadow, which means if they're using a ham radio, they got to follow one of us, or we got to follow them around and be their, you know, the license for that. So very often, county will give us a radio so that we can talk back to them and they can listen and communicate with us, and we'll move that information on to where it needs to go. Um, and it's true for officials who must regularly deal with sensitive issues, but other voluntary agencies may use these radio services of their own operations. And over over the latest thing is GMRS, Family Radio Service radios. A lot of people have them. There are agencies, small groups that have them, like Red Cross or whatever, and even CB radio they'll use, anything to get it through. Some radio services require licenses and others don't. In a true emergency, as defined by the FCC, this may not be a problem. FCC rules give everyone special permission to use any means necessary to communicate in order to protect life and property, but only when no other normal means of communications is possible. And that's something that people get kind of confused about. They'll say, "Well, you don't need a ham license. Here, take this." That's not the case. If if there's no other means, then you're okay with it, but it's not a normal thing. If your group is planning to use licensed radios, obtain your license well before the emergency and keep it current. That would be business band radios or GMRS. Yeah, you got to have a license for GMRS. They're like $75, and you fill out paperwork and you get them. If you own a radio but no license, a judge could claim premeditation if you used it and disturb other licensed users. That's pretty much spells it out. If there are other people using the same frequencies and you come on when you're not licensed and other things happen and the judge gets involved, yeah, okay. Can I modify my radio? No, you cannot modify your radio and call for help on the local police frequency the next time you see a car crash on the highway. Why is that in there? Because I know it has happened, and that is not legal. Law enforcement agencies are not bound by the FCC's rules. We are. Hams who have called for help on police frequencies have been convicted of interfering with police agencies under state and local laws, even though the FCC has taken no enforcement action. But if you're interfering with the police and you're on their frequencies, you're interfering. That's just the bottom line of it. Modified amateur radios. We all know this, and if you don't, you will. You can modify many of the VHF and UHF amateur radios for operations in a nearby public service and business bands. And in our terms, that would be your 2-meter and your 70-centimeter radios. They can be modified to be in the other bands. Radios, it's not legal to do this for regular emergency use, and radios must be type accepted by the FCC to be in those bands. Amateur radios are not. And here's where you find a lot of times there are a lot of hams that like to play with Motorola radios, and those are type accepted. But even so, you don't have the permission to be there. And that's where a lot of people get confused. They think it's a type accepted radio, I can use it. Follow the rules. CB radio. Oh, it doesn't mean children's band. It means citizen band. Okay, well, no licensing is required and tactical or self-assigned identifiers are acceptable. At one time, there was not. A recommended method promoted by FCC is the letter K followed by the user's first and last initials followed by your zip code. They used to assign you those, but now this has become the thing. And if you have a valid Class D license from the mid 80s, you may continue using your old CB call sign. When I was working on these radios for the public, I had a store where we did this. I had a repair shop. I got a license. I did pay $75 for it. It was KEW 5066. Had to remember that. And when I got out of the business of servicing radios, that went away. And I still have it, but the papers somewhere. Okay, now technical information. The CB channels used to be the 11-meter ham band. And that's why if you get into some of the really old antique radios, they have the 11-meter band in it. And they start out with 23 channels and went to 40 back in, that was toward the mid 70s when they added the 40 channels. 4 watts is the maximum output power on it. Typically it's AM, amplitude modulation, or single sideband. FCC rules permit communication to a maximum of 155 miles. If the skip's right, if the ionosphere is proper, you can get that. Typically, they don't go that far. Effective range averages between 2 and 8 miles when you're mobile to mobile, depending on antennas, terrain, and propagation, up to 25 miles base to mobile or base to base. Single sideband can increase the range considerably, as we have found out on ham radio as well. And channel 9 is still reserved for emergency motorist assistance traffic only. I don't know if any of you do CB, but as I travel, I don't have an antenna to talk on it, and I wouldn't anyway, but I have an ICOM 706 Mark II-G in the car, and I've tuned into it. It's a noisy mess and a lot of profanity, so I don't go there. But in emergency communications, it could be helpful. MURS, multi-use radio service, it's personal and business operation is what it's intended for. Primarily intended for portable, operation with a handheld, a maximum power of 2 watts. The MURS frequencies are listed here. Where are you going to find them? Probably those guys that are running the flag force that lets you through traffic jams or around construction. They probably have these channels on it. The bouncers at one of the nightclubs I worked at had one of these channels that are listed here. Bandwidth for the first 3 frequencies listed are 11.25 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz for the last 2, which falls more along the lines of normal ham radio. Frequency stability within 5 parts per million, antenna height limited to 60 feet above the ground, and no licenses are needed. And you can see a handheld fits all those power and height requirements because it's in your hand. Family radio service is designed for the short range personal communications. You can buy these at any outdoor shop, gun store, all that sort of thing. Hunters use them all the time. And often you'll find that, parents use it to keep track of their kids when they're out. Almost everyone owns one or more of these things. Um, the channels in some areas are crowded, undisciplined, and making them pretty much useless for emergency communications, and that's true. A fun time is to sit and listen, put them in a scanner and listen to what's around you on the family radio service. You'll be surprised. When they first came out, we used them in our company to call each other and keep in touch with each other. And they worked great until they got congested in some of the areas, the cities we went into. There are 14 channels available on UHF, 8 different tones, CTCSS tones, which hams like to call PL tones, private line, to limit the background noise, so you only hear your own people. They have low power, uh, under a watt, under a half a watt, zero 0.1 to zero 0.5 watts. Uh, the React recommends the use of FRS channel 1 with no tone as an emergency calling channel. React is well known for their work on citizen band radio back whenever, and they still are. And a well organized group of people. And it's good to see they're using those as the radios too. First 7 channels of it are shared with the general mobile radio service, GMRS, which I mentioned earlier. And you're supposed to have a license for that. Chances of distress call being heard on either service is greatly increased on these 7 common channels of the GMRS. And many family radio service radios are offered as a combination FRS and GMRS radios with up to 2 watts output on GMRS. And like it says, there is a license required for them. And again, you do find them usually in the sports department, and they even come in cool camouflage too. So, and the GMRS service has 15 UHF frequencies above 462, 5625. Notice the 4-digit extensions. Each are paired with matching repeater inputs with a 5 megahertz higher transmit. 7, my internet went again. The 7 okay, somebody help me with that word.
Interstitial.
Interstitial.
Correct.
New English word for me to learn. Channels. They're shared with the family radio service. Power is limited to 50 watts, except on interstitial channels of 5 watts. There's no frequency coordination. Users must cooperate locally to effectively use the channels. CTCSS tones or PL tones are the same as for the family radio service. FM voice operation is permitted. Digital modes and phone patches are not. And 462.675 is the emergency travel information when monitored by React. Around here, I know there are several GMRS repeaters in operation, and they get probably more work out of them than they do out of the 2-meter and other ham radio repeaters. The picture shown here is the one that I see most often, and they beep when you push the buttons, and the license required family radio services radios often include them. You should have a license. And if you operate the radio under the rules that apply to GMRS, you must have a license for that. GMRS radios generally transmit higher power, 1 to 5 watts typical, and have detachable antennas. The current fee is $80. Okay, they went up. And the manual that comes with the radio or the label placed on it by the manufacturer should indicate the service that it's certified for. And I know that people are using the Bowfangs and programming them for it too. Whether they are type accepted or not, I do not know. Public safety radio. There are instances when the use of police and fire radio frequency is possible. The agency itself might allow you to train, might allow and train you for such use. You must be trained for them because they have their own rules. Individual officer may ask you to use his radio to call for help when he cannot. Keep your transmission short and to the point. And do not tie up the channel with long explanations and cease transmitting if they tell you to. Because I think the reason that was put in here, because there are a lot of hams who like to rag chew. They get on and they just start telling a story and they don't know when to stop. So make sure that you keep your transmission short to the point if they let you use their radio. And that same goes actually for when you're passing messages and communications in our service as well. Of course, cellular phones and PCS phones, in a widespread disaster situation, these phones can become overloaded. The reason is too many people try to use the same pairs of frequencies. It'll kick you off and you'll get a no connect, or in cell phone terms, busy. And if a message is sent by way of two-way radio, try your cell phone. Cellular and PCS phone transmissions, especially digital, are considered more secure. In addition, it is possible to send low-speed data or fax transmissions over the cellular network. And you have other methods on modern phones as well. Marine radio, they are FM marine radios operated on the internationally allocated channels in the 160 megahertz band. And
Terry,
again, yeah,
just to go back to the cell phone stuff, having been through a couple of those situations, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're getting the no service, or the system is backed up, you can still send a text message very often, because the text message takes a couple of 100 milliseconds versus continuous data stream of a voice call. So a lot of times you can poke a text message in there and it will go through, when voice communications won't.
that's very true. I'm glad you mentioned that. I've been in situations where that trying to get reports out from concerts to the radio station. You're right. Text messages will get through. Um, these marine radios are HF single sideband radios on a variety of ITU channels, International Telegraph Union channels between 2 and 30 megahertz. Um, that's the HF. I don't know how many of you have been in boats. I've been in the radio rooms of some boats, ships, just mostly boats, yacht kind of things. And the first thing I looked, I said, "Hey, you guys have ham radio in here?" And he said, "No, it's marine." And I said, "So you have an auto tuner on the antenna, huh? So I can do HF." They said, "Yeah, you could if we'd let you." So it is a lot of the radio like we're used to seeing. I think there was an ICOM in the last one I was in. The FM stations for vessels in U.S. waters do not require a license. They're in the 160 megahertz band. Operation on the HF channels does require a license. Channel 16 on theirs is a distress channel. And if you hear a vessel in distress whose calls are going unanswered by the Coast Guard, you may legally answer them from an unlicensed land-based station under the FCC's emergency communications rules. And the FM marine ones, by the way, are on the Millersburg ferry boat, and they had me troubleshooting one of them about a year ago, and they were very interesting radios. Okay, aviation radio is in the AM band, not AM broadcast band, but it's 108 to 136 megahertz, and they're amplitude modulated. FCC licenses are required for all aircraft stations operating internationally, but not within the United States. And emergency locator transmitters, the ELTs, are automatic devices that transmit a distress signal on 121.5. That's your civilian one. The military is on 243.0. That's the automatic devices. You hear them say we're getting a beacon from an ELT on a crash. That's what they're talking about. And they're also used for marine emergency positioning indicating radio beacons, EPIRBs, and the new land-based personal radio beacons are on. And if you want to listen around to them, you'll hear them on occasion, but you got to be pretty close to hear them. And if you live under an airport, like apparently I do now, they put one in near me, you can hear a lot of chatter on the from the pilots on it. Non-radio communications are still considered, if they're still functioning, use the phone, the fax, whenever a message might be too sensitive for the radio. That's like a no-brainer. If you look for the best way to get it through, as we said earlier. Fax is also useful for sending long lists where accuracy is critical. If the lines are up, do not tie up a radio frequency sending a long list of supplies if a working fax or phone is available. There was a time we were sending similar to fax over ham radio, but I don't know that anybody does that anymore. Couriers, if you can find them, they're sensitive for very lengthy messages. Fax and phone lines are out of service. You might want to have it hand delivered, and it might be the best choice if you can get through. Acting as a courier does not eliminate the use of a radio, since couriers need to be dispatched from place to place. Sometimes that courier could be you as a ham radio operator too. And of course, the internet, email, web EOC, packet, so forth are other options you could use. Okay, anybody have any questions or comments before we move on? All right. Which can you not use to identify your transmissions on a CB radio? This one should be pretty clear. Your amateur call. And the reason is we don't want them to know we're hams. No, it's just not what you do. A self-assigned identifier, tactical call sign, that's probably the best. And I would say the last thing would be your handle, whatever that may be. Big buck and a big truck. That could be your handle. So what is the best course of action for summoning help on a CB? The answer to this is these two channels, channel 9, because that's the emergency channel for motorists and so forth. And the police and all that, they do out monitor that. And 19, because that's the normal truck driver's channel, which is not an advantage of using family radio service. Not an advantage. Yeah, they're low power. They're under a half a watt. Who may currently license GMRS system with the FCC? An individual for family and personal use. They're not for businesses or charitable institutions or anything like that. It's for an individual or for a family, which is not true of MURS. And the answer is a station license is required. You don't need it for that. And I hear it all the time on HF. People are talking about their using their Bofangs on MURS. I would have to look that up to see if those radios are actually allowed there. Someone told me once they were. Later on, I found out someone said they may not be.
Hey, Bailey, you know what time it is? Hey, Bailey, you know what time it is?
Oh, for Pete's sake. Good golly. All right, 25 is up next, and we do have time for that. The guy that put these together has a lot of humor in him, I guess. Okay. You can't see that screen yet, right?
Not yet.
Okay, we're looking for 25. Here we go.
Got it.
Okay. What to expect in large-scale disasters. At the onset, critical communications requirements in a disaster. A huge increase in the volume of traffic on a public safety radio channels, accompanied by prolonged waiting periods to gain access on public safety radio channels. That's the agencies we serve. And equipment outages can occur at key locations. Messages are not handled in the order of priority. These can happen. Urgent messages are often lost, and a need arises for agencies to communicate with one another. And incompatible radio systems, unfamiliar attainable frequencies, names, terms, and procedures. The incompatible radio systems became the highlight of the after the towers were hit. People came to realize the need for all that to work together, and they've been trying ever since to try to make everything work together. Large scale situations contact locations at distances beyond the range of a given radio system, 50 to 350 miles, 350. Message reply delays are expected. Deferred decisions on crucial matters, message duplication, confusing messages with widely differing priorities. There are things that you can expect. Different modes of communications are required in addition to voice. Volume data in printed form data modes, high-speed packet, facsimile, Morse code or PSK31 under difficult reception conditions, encoded data for extreme privacy, television, mobile, portable, aeronautical, marine systems, and telephone interconnects to and from radio systems like phone patches and so forth. And I know some of you are saying, more Morse code, huh? Yeah, it's worth learning. I will say it's not a requirement anymore, but it's worth learning. And the operational problems that might arise, high volume traffic circuits with no supply of message forms. Using only printed forms available that were designed for a different unrelated agency or function, attempting to decipher scribbling from the untrained message writers using scribes who cannot understand radio parlance or read through the QRM, and becoming inundated with traffic volume so heavy it results in confusion over which messages are to be sent, which and which were sent, been received for delivery, and for which have been received to be filed for ready reference. And what happens in the first 72 hours? It takes time to overcome obstacles in placing fully activated mutual aid resources into operation. And the greatest concentration of relief effort is generally found in incorporated cities served by agencies with paid professionals. And assuming their equipment, facilities, and personnel remain operable, that's where it goes. And the suburbs and isolated areas of a county suffer from remoteness from fire departments, public works, law enforcement, and the services of other agencies. Like if you live where I do, out in the middle of nowhere. The public is often isolated and unable to call for help during the nature and extent of the disaster. It's what happens. This is the first 72 hours that you'll learn all this. Should they make plans to wait it out, prepare to evacuate, actually evacuate with some possessions to a safe place, obtain physical aid for an impending catastrophe, offer aid to a relative, a friend, or a neighbor? You got to make these plans. And the lack of information results in further attempts to use of the telephone, which is already saturated. These are things you can expect. The opportunity to call for help is often unavailable to most citizens during the first 72 hours. And distorted public perceptions develop through the misinformation. Broadcast stations, if they're still in the air, initially disseminate rumors in the absence of factual information, and where they make up stuff. In the past week, we have seen that on a national basis. People walk aimlessly seeking a route to a family or friends, and many, fearful of looting, remain in the hazardous buildings or return, as do shopkeepers, to salvage their valuables. And as darkness falls, rumors of looting are generated. Some of them are true. And in the first 72 hours, the word circulates about shelter locations. Some displaced persons stay at homes of friends, relatives, or strangers. Others are housed in public shelters into the fourth day and still searching for family members elsewhere and without communication. We're starting to see other things we might be able to help with. Opportunity to notify concerned distant relatives is not afforded except via amateur radio and the Red Cross. Later, and often too late, information trickles in about problem areas or cases that have been overlooked due to lack of communication. Some potential evacuees are overlooked. Survival instincts prevail. Interagency communications is usually poor or non-existent. And at the end of the 72 hours, the disaster remains in virtual isolation. The disaster area remains in virtual isolation, except for helicopter service for known critical areas, cases, and official use. Amateur radio operators from the neighboring counties and states offer to help, but are often unable to cross the roadblocks established to limit access by sightseers and potential looters. They block the roads. Disorganized local volunteers often lack essential skills and orientation. Costly mistakes are made and systems bogged down. All in the first 72 hours. Seems like a whole lot going on. The dead pose a serious health problem. Stress rises among the citizens. Little overall assessment emergencies in the first 72 hours about available emergency resources and relief supplies. Shortages are apparent and they're growing. Travel continues to be difficult and slow. Relief supplies trickle into storage locations. Food and water shortages have become critical. Normal water sources have been cut off or contaminated. Relief efforts are mounted when someone takes charge, makes a decision, and directs the efforts. The command and control process of directing requires communication, the ingredient in short supply in all disasters. Friends of mine live in I think it's St. Thomas, and they, of course, had hurricanes come through not too awful long ago, a year or so, and the stories they told were quite eye-opening of all of that happening there. And in Puerto Rico, it happened too, obviously. The critiques following a disaster, as always, the cry is heard, the next time we must be better prepared. The committee is formed and it starts over. That's what happens in the first 72 hours. Has anybody been involved in anything like this? All of that is true. What is the first thing that happens after a disaster has occurred? First thing is a massive increase in the volume of traffic on public safety radio channels. And you can see why we're called in. Which of the following statement is not true of the interagency communications? Not true is agencies all use the same radio systems and frequencies. They absolutely do not. In the first 72 hours of a disaster situation, where's the greatest concentration of relief effort to be found? In the urban areas, because it's more people. Which organization handles health and welfare messages on behalf of the victims? The American Red Cross does that, often with the help of amateur radio. What is the usual situation in a disaster after the initial 72 hours? The disaster area remains in virtual isolation. Now we're going to move on to number 26. Have we got time? It's probably not time to finish that one before 8 o'clock because we have like 10 minutes to go. So we may call it at that and then pick it up next time